One of Shakespeare's most rarely produced epics is finally coming to New York City. NAATCO's Henry VI, a trilogy in 2 parts. A kingdom in free fall, a story that feels urgent right now, and an award-winning all-Asian American cast. Performances begin June 9th at the Public Theater. Tickets at publictheater.org.
You're listening to Whoa! Potluck.
And hey, welcome to Books and Boba, a book club and podcast featuring books by Asian and Asian American authors. My name is Marvin Yue.
And I'm Rira Yu.
And on today's episode, debut author Cindy Pham joins us for an author chat to talk about her debut novel, The Secret World of Briar Rose, a sapphic fantasy retelling of the Sleeping Beauty folk fairy tale. As always, Books and Boba is supported in part by our listeners. So if you've been enjoying our podcast and want to become a bigger part of our book club, head on over to patreon.com/booksandboba, where as an official member, you can gain access to our members exclusive Discord server, where you can chat with us and fellow members in real time about all sorts of topics, including our monthly book club picks. And if you join us at the Honey Boba level, you also gain access to our monthly bonus podcast Boba Chats, as well as the opportunity to help us pick a quarterly book club pick. And if you're listening to this episode on the day it comes out, we are currently taking suggestions for our July 2026 Patron's Choice Book Club pick. So if you aren't a Honey Boba member, join now so you can help us pick what book we're reading for next month.
Yeah, so we talked to Cindy about, her being a content creator and also like transitioning into being a novelist, her history with mental health and how that has equipped her to write the story. Just trigger warnings for people who may be sensitive to this topic, but suicidal ideation and depression is going to be discussed heavily in this interview. But we do have fun, so I hope you guys enjoy this chat with Cindy. And we're here with Cindy Pham, a queer Vietnamese American author who works as a full-time designer while moonlighting as a fiction writer and content creator. Her YouTube channel, Read with Cindy, has amassed over 500,000 subscribers and focuses on books, movie reactions, and candid commentary. And we're here to talk about her debut novel, The Secret World of Briar Rose. Welcome to the show, Cindy.
Hi, thanks for having me.
I'm super stoked because I've been a subscriber for so long. The first video that I've seen of yours was the Lunar Chronicles by Marissa Meyer, and I think this is like such a great full circle moment because for our listeners who don't know what the Lunar Chronicles is, it's a sci-fi reimagining of Cinderella, and the sequels are like based on other fairy tales as well, like Snow White and Rapunzel. And I remember your video was like measuring each character's like big dick energy, and I was like, wow, this is like
Yeah, the Lunar Chronicles was actually how I got into reading in the first place and how I even discovered BookTube. I just became so obsessed with that series that I literally searched up that series on YouTube, and that's how I discovered that there was like a whole subgenre out there of people just dedicated to talking about books, and that's how I started my own channel. But yeah, it's very much a full circle moment because it's a fairy tale reimagining, and now my debut book also ended up being a fairy tale reimagining as well, except it's not quite, I would say my book is not quite as fun and lively as the Lunar Chronicles is. It's much more like somber and depressing in comparison, but it's still a full circle moment for me.
Yeah, I'm so glad that you're here and we're here to talk about your book. But before we, talk about your debut novel, I want to like take us back in time. Obviously, you're a YouTuber. You've been in the space for a very long time, but were you writing before you started reviewing books on YouTube?
So I actually was I would say that I was much more of an avid writer before I started my booktube channel. I would write so many bad first drafts of novels throughout high school, middle school, like elementary. I was very much into the hobby of writing as like a form of escapism. And then when I went to college in the first few years after a postgrad, I actually took a break from writing because I felt like I should have focused on my career. And so I was focusing on, becoming a better designer and trying to be more enmeshed in like my girl boss era. But then inevitably, I went back into reading again, like with discovering the Lunar Chronicles, and I started making YouTube videos about books, and that just really reinvigorated my love for writing and for storytelling. And so it wasn't like a super linear journey. Basically, to summarize it, I was writing very avidly throughout childhood, took a break from that, then got into starting a booktube channel and reading more avidly and talking about books, and then that kind of led into a full circle moment of me returning to my love for writing again. And the first draft for this book, for my debut novel, was actually written in my senior year of high school. And that was the last first draft of a book that I wrote compared to all of the previous very bad drafts before. And so when I decided to return to writing, that was the specific story that I wanted to revisit again to try to publish.
That's amazing considering that, like so many years have passed, and sticking to one story is really difficult in my opinion. And I just want to know, like, what was it about this story that just stayed with you, that you're like, I have to finish this? Because obviously you could have worked on other projects, and especially since you're in booktube, you know how trends change in the market. So were you worried about that as well?
I feel like for me, the reason why my mind kept on going back to that story idea is probably because it's the most personal story to me. It was basically inspired by this reoccurring wish I've had since childhood, where I wished I could sleep forever and never wake up. And I one day had made that connection to the tale of Sleeping Beauty and her curse to sleep forever. And I thought that it was a really interesting allegory to make about depression and suicidal ideation. And it made me wonder, what if she had also wanted to sleep forever? And what if this wasn't a curse, but some respite from depression and grief? And so the idea really just spiraled from there. And I think I wasn't diagnosed with major depressive disorder until later on in adulthood. So this feeling of depression and listlessness and that desire for escaping from reality was very much present throughout my life. And I think that's why I had to come back to this story idea, because as an adult, it was still very much relevant to me. And so I think the story grew a lot with me. I'm glad that it had been so many years before I revisited again, because I think with the fully developed frontal lobe that helped me, and also being like a much more avid reader too, that helped make me a much stronger writer, because by that point I knew what I wanted to read in a story and what I wanted to write, as opposed to maybe if I wasn't so much of an avid reader, or if I was kind of just sticking to booktube trends. I think that it would be kind of a disservice to just write based on what I think the market wants or what publishers think what's trending right now. And I think that for someone in my position, obviously with the booktube platform, it gives advantages to being published. And I kind of felt like I owed it to myself to use that opportunity to stay true to a story that I would have wanted to read as a depressed younger version of myself. And maybe that would have helped me feel more seen and understood as well. And so it wasn't really a concern for me to, stay with trends or whatever was marketable. But at the same time, I could say that's due to my privilege as well, because I already have like that built-in platform. And I think for that reason, it let me fully indulge in the type of story that I wanted to write too.
Yeah, I'm really curious, having covered so many books through your booktube channel, what were some of like the biggest like lessons you took from reading so many books that you applied in The Secret World of Briar Rose?
Yeah, I definitely don't think that reading a bunch of books makes you a good writer, but I definitely think that it makes you a more purposeful writer because you get a sense of what you enjoy reading and what you don't enjoy reading. And from my experience, I found that I really enjoy reading flowery prose, which is not for everyone. Like, I've really enjoyed books where some people are like, this author just needs to choose one metaphor. But for me, I'm like, no, give me all the metaphors. Like, I love to read that kind of prose. I also really enjoy reading very flawed, unlikable characters that are messy and complex. I think sometimes people kind of expect characters to reflect the values that they want to have, but I think it's more interesting when characters reflect the flaws that you might have, or even like having an outlet with a very flawed character that's just crashing out, because you can't do that in real life. So it's nice and more fun to see that happen in fiction and get that out of your system. I also really enjoy kind of like the ruminative, reflective quality in certain books as well. I found that to be more common in literary books. And I think that's why I also enjoy reading like a wide range of genres when it comes to books too, because I think the fun part is kind of like picking out my favorite parts of each one and trying to see like, what can I make with this? So even with my, like, this is a young adult fantasy book, but it actually, like, there was one rejection that I got because the editor said that it was too depressing and literary for their taste.
Oh, no.
But that's actually what I love about books, though. And that's probably like an influence of me reading a lot of depressing literary books that ended up being like an influence for my young adult fantasy book as well. And I think there's room for, you know, a ton of different blends and combinations of different things that we enjoy. And yeah, I think that's why, like, that's all the more reason to just write based on what you enjoy reading and not what you predict an audience will enjoy. Because ultimately, if this is like a passion project that you're dedicating your time with, I think you owe it to yourself to stick true to your vision and what resonates with you.
Yeah, I was actually really surprised by your flowery prose and the languid pace of your book, because you come off as like very straightforward and decisive in your reviews. Sometimes like, you know, to borderline like vulgarness in like your roast videos. So I was like, oh, like what would a novel by Cindy look like? And I was like, I bet it's gonna be something that has like more simplistic prose, something that like strikes a lot harder. But you know, like I was proven wrong. I was like, wow, this is very different from what I thought Cindy's voice was going to be.
Yeah, no, here's an entire page describing a lake.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, I like to think that it's a different part of myself that I don't necessarily get to show in my videos. I mean, I think when it comes to posting like videos on a channel or really just any kind of social media platform, there's like only a sliver of yourself that you're presenting to the world. And I think you know, I'm definitely amplifying my snarky, humorous side, whereas this book, it doesn't really have much humor or snark. It is very much more like reflective and somber, but that's like a whole other part to myself too that I don't necessarily share with the public, but I was able to really dive into it for this book and kind of use it as an outlet to express that part of myself. And so I think that it's actually kind of nice when people are able to like read the writing and are able to see like, whoa, this is very different from like how she talks.
Yeah. I mean, I was surprised, but it was a good surprise. I was like, wow, versatility. And I'm curious because you work as a full-time designer, and being a content creator is also a lot of work. I mean, Marvin and I have been doing this podcast for almost 10 years now, and you know, we're constantly reading books, but you read way more than us because I've seen your monthly recap videos. And I'm like, how is she finishing all these books so quickly on top of her day job? And now like you have a book, and I'm like, when does she have time to write? So can you like walk us through like how you do your time management for creative projects?
I am still trying to figure that out. Like, I feel like I'm always constantly barely floating above surface and trying to stay afloat. It's been kind of difficult actually, like juggling everything. I think it was okay when I was just doing YouTube videos and my day job, but now that we're getting into like the book promotion side of things and like actual like publishing for the book, it has definitely been like a juggle for me to figure that out. In terms of balancing out the writing aspect of it, or actually I'll go back a little bit to like how I read so many books. So I basically only read during my commutes. I'll get a lot of my reading done when I'm commuting to my job every day, or I'll listen to an audiobook while I'm doing chores. And how I got my writing done was very, very slowly. Like I am a very slow writer where I think I would be lucky to just even break 100 words in a day. But how I tried to approach it was the Pomodoro method, where I would give myself 25 minutes on a timer to just work on my novel and not focus on any other kind of distraction. No matter how unmotivated I was or how tired I was, I would just give myself those 25 minutes and then give myself a 5-minute break afterward, and then decide if I have the time or energy or motivation to continue forward from there. But it was just those incremental pieces that cumulatively all came together, and very, very like many years later, finally created a novel. So it's not like the fastest method, but it's the one that works for me considering all the other responsibilities I had to juggle. But now my next challenge will be, if I were to be like an active writer, and, publish more than one book, what would that look like? And I'm still trying to figure that out, because I know my agent is going to ask me, oh, what were you thinking about the next book? And I'm like, I don't know, girl. Like, we'll try to figure it out. I'm trying to push back the idea of having, being under contract to write a bunch of books too. Because I've seen authors constantly be stressed out about meeting a deadline for submitting their next draft. And I just know that with the different responsibilities I have, it's going to be way too stressful for me to do that. And I also think sometimes you should let things cook. I think, and maybe I'm biased because like this story had a lot of time to cook. And I was able to revisit it having like fully grown a frontal lobe, and like having like knowing more about the world and being more politically conscious and everything. I think that really added to the benefits of writing the story much later on. So yeah, it's a balancing act for sure.
Yeah, I mean, like, kudos to you, and kudos to all the writers out there who work a full-time job and are sneaking in writing here and there, because it is a very long process and also a very lonely process. Did you work with any like writing groups, or was it more of like a solitary activity for you? Like, did you find mentor groups online?
Yes, I actually found my mentor from a writing mentorship program, and it was so beneficial to have her read through the work and be able to give me feedback and just make the story so much stronger, especially because I feel like when it comes to having other people read your work, you have to be very purposeful with the kind of people that read it, because it can't just be like a random person or even like a friend. I think that it's hard to eliminate that kind of bias. But with her, we were very much aligned in having similar tastes in writing and reading. She also really enjoys flowery prose, and she enjoys and also writes books that have themes around depression and are very ruminative and slow paced. So I think because we were on the same page about that, it helped make her feedback a lot more applicable for my story as well, as opposed to, maybe someone that is more into like romantasy or like an epic, dense fantasy series. Like they might not have the same inclinations that I'm trying to have for my book. So that was super helpful. And also there were some other writers that I would do like writing sprints with. So a lot of times, like in those 25-minute sprints, it would be with another friend who's also trying to work on their novel too. So there's like a little bit of camaraderie there. I would say still mostly solitary, because so much of it is like in your head and you're ruminating over the story. But it has been helpful for me to have other friends who are writing books, because sometimes like I'll be so tired and then someone will say, hey, I want to do a sprint tonight. And I'll force myself to do it when I know that I probably wouldn't have been accountable if I had been myself otherwise.
Yeah, I mean, having that writing community is so important. And, I've heard some like in the past couple of years where we have covered book news on this podcast, I've heard some drama stories from writing groups on Discord. So it's always like a mixed bag. You don't know like who you're
Yeah,
gonna get when it comes to reading.
yeah, that's actually why I haven't joined any writer discords, because I've heard those similar stories and I've talked about those stories on my channel too. And they scare me too much. I don't like the clickiness that comes with writing, or I don't like the feeling of comparisons, which I get that's vibe from a lot when I hear about these stories of people, trying to evaluate how well another person's book is doing. And I think that life is already hard enough as it is, that we don't need to make it harder for ourselves. And I feel like the best way that I've been able to combat this is really trying to lean into the support and community aspect. I feel like this year, even though my book is debuting in June, I felt like it was really important to dedicate videos and posts on social media to shouting out other books that are debuting this year, and even other books that are debuting on the same day as me. Because I feel like, again, like life is hard enough. And I think publishing puts books under a very capitalistic framework. And I think that's why it makes people so antsy about how well like another book is doing or how much another author is getting, that I think the best way to combat it is really just leaning into like helping each other rather than giving into any insecurities or seeing it as any competitive element. I'm also not a competitive person at all. So I feel like if anyone wants to see it as competition, like I will back out and give in like right away, because I'm not interested in engaging with any of that.
I totally get it. I feel like I used to be a really competitive person, but I've burnt out. I'm just like, yeah, you can win, whatever. 2 + 2 is 5. Like have it your way. And yeah. I want to bring it back to the story of The Secret World of Briar Rose. It is a reimagining of Sleeping Beauty, like we mentioned, and I thought that was a really interesting story to pick to kind of adapt, because the original heroine, Sleeping Beauty, is sleeping. She is very passive, and having a passive protagonist is tricky to write. And I also thought it was like really interesting that you flipped the script on a lot of the original fairy tales archetypes. So you have the princess in distress, you have the evil fairy, you have the jealous queen, and the brave and faithful prince, but they're all very different in your book. And I just want to hear your thoughts on like, what did you hope to explore by adding, I guess, a wider scope to those archetypes in your reimagining of this fairy tale?
Yeah, I think that's the fun part about reimagining a fairy tale or another existing story, especially one that for the original source material, if it's pretty bare bones, it gives you so much room to see it as like a foundation or launching point to take it a step further or add like extra layers that maybe, readers didn't get a chance to before. Like, for example, with the titular Sleeping Beauty, we don't really know much about her character because, like you said, she's asleep most of the time. And her character is also often criticized for being very passive and having a lack of identity in her own story. But I find that those are common symptoms for me with my depression, where I think it is extremely difficult to muster up some kind of agency or being an active person to try to have some kind of grasp of your own life. And I think there's no desire to save the world when you don't even have a desire to save yourself. And I think it was really interesting to actually lean into those qualities and kind of dive into, she is a passive character, but why is she the way that she is? She is asleep throughout the whole story, but what was actually happening in her subconscious? I kind of liked framing it in a similar way to how Wicked is a reimagining of Wizard of Oz, where it has the same characters, but you're seeing a different perspective, and usually from a perspective that you didn't get a chance to before. And that recontextualizes a lot of the characters that you're familiar with in the story. And I also found an interesting theme to explore, which was that I think like fairy tales within the context of the narrative are stories that oftentimes the victors are the ones telling it. And so as a result, they'll frame certain people as the good guys and other people as the bad guys. And I think what makes it interesting to explore for me is kind of breaking down that framework and questioning who is this fairy tale actually benefiting. And I think what I like to think about for this story is that this one can be canon to the actual Sleeping Beauty story, but maybe the one that we had been told about wasn't like the full truth. And so that's how I like to see it. And even like, you know, the original archetypes of like the brave and loyal prince and like the doting godmothers and like the wicked fairy godmother, they're all technically true, but there's more context and nuance now to these characters and why they were the way that they were. And sometimes, you know, like even certain qualities that are admirable could be seen as villainous if you flip the switch a little bit. Like with the prince being loyal, who exactly is he loyal to? And what are the consequences of him, you know, almost having such a tunnel vision for the love of his life at the expense of others around him? And so I liked navigating within those parameters for the original fairy tale.
Yeah, I did enjoy that you made the three fairy godmothers essentially like Phil daughters in a way. Like they're just kind of bumbling their way through their task. And I really like that, you know, so your book actually starts off 100 years in the future after the princess falls asleep. And, you know, we follow the character of Corin as she, you know, searches the ruins of the castle to find her sister and ends up in Sleeping Beauty's like dream world. I'm curious, was this framing device, like, was this present in your like senior year high school version, or was it something that you added later on?
So in the first draft, when I was a little baby Cindy, I actually only wrote it as one timeline where you followed Corinne the thief stumbling across this dream world and you're seeing everything from her point of view. But then when I revisited the story as an adult, I realized that there was so much context that needed to be shown in the dream world because so much of our dreams are influenced by different memories that we've had, or different things that we've seen and experienced, and that influences the subconscious, which we get to see in the dream world. And so that was when I introduced the mechanic of having a dual timeline story where we alternate between present day with Corinne discovering the dream world, and then 100 years ago where you see the events of Princess Amelia and what she's dealing with leading up to her finally falling asleep forever and the curse happening. And I feel like that was a fun framework to have because things that would happen 100 years ago, you would read about, and then in the next chapter, you would see them referenced again in the dream world, but be distorted somehow in this imaginary subconsciousness. And I think that made it a more interesting challenge for me to see the ways that you could tie in those threads, even though they're basically like a century apart. But in terms of like always having the story told through a third character, like an outsider character who's not even part of the fairy tale, I knew from the beginning that I had always wanted a character who wasn't part of the dream world and you could basically experience this new setting with her. And I've always been a fan of like anti-heroes. And so I also am a fan of characters that are very different from one another. Like usually when I think of stories, there's usually two characters that have to like work together, even though they could not be any more different from one another. So like I already knew Princess Amelia would be a much more like softer, demure, like passive princess. And I wanted Corinne to be someone that was more like rough around the edges and cynical and very much like a foil to Amelia's character. But I also kind of felt like, you know, with the context of fairy tales and like who gets to tell them, to me, Corinne represents people who don't have their stories told often. And I think a lot of times like people like Corinne and Ellie are seen as people who are kind of like relegated to background characters. They're the people who are almost seen as a necessary death to war. They're the people who, you know, when there's wars happening in fictional stories, they're the ones that die quickly and are not given much of a second thought. And so I think that contrasts with her meeting Briar Rose in the dream world and pointing out that, like you can run away from your problems and have magic and be able to have this whimsical world, but people like us have to live with those consequences. And when we disappear from the world, nobody remembers us. And so I think that added to that tension between the characters and just like a fun foil between the two of them.
Yeah, I was gonna mention, I was like, oh, like Princess Amelia literally has pretty privilege. Like she's able to get away with so many things because she is pretty and because she is a spoiled princess. And I was gonna ask you like how that pretty privilege, how that privilege itself just affects the way your characters deal with grief, because Corin is poor and she's also dark skinned, and like you don't get the chance to run away into like you don't get to like sleep away your problems. Like you have to deal with the consequences. And I thought that was like a great foil, like you mentioned, between like these two characters. And I just want to like mention to our listeners, this book is sapphic, but it is not romantasy. It is traumatic and traumatic plus romantasy. I don't know, like traumantasy.
Traumantasy, yeah.
Yeah, traumantasy. And it like there is romance, but it's very like in the background. And I know in your press release you mentioned that your characters became queer long before you realized you were too. And I just want to like, can you tell us like what made you want to change your characters from heteronormative roles to being queer, and how has discovering your own queerness impact your writing?
Yeah, definitely. So again, going back to baby Cindy in her first draft, she was so heteronormative that actually Corinne started off as a man and it was going to be, more of like a straight story. But when I revisited it as an adult, I was still quote unquote straight at the time, but I think I had become much more socially conscious. I was like the token straight friend in a group of queer friends. And I think that helped me really open my mind to a lot of other possibilities and identities. And for me, that decision to make the main characters queer women was less about representation or diversity or anything like that. It was more so because the more I thought about the themes for this book, the more I felt like making them queer women would add another layer to it, because this dream world is supposed to represent this impossible alternate reality where you are no longer burdened by different judgments or oppressive systems that reality brings. And this is like a world where you can fully be yourself or have the space to figure out, who you are. And I think that kind of world would be wonderful for everyone, but it hits a lot different when you are queer or marginalized or a woman of color. And I realized that by adding or tweaking those identities of those characters, it gives a richer way of exploring that kind of theme within the narrative. And that was basically my reasoning for it. Even as like a straight person, I was like, I think we're onto something here. And when I found out I was queer later, it kind of became like an accidental representation, I guess. I only found out I was queer because I had met someone who is now my girlfriend. And the way that I think about queerness, I feel like has kind of, been embedded within the story a little bit, where I kind of feel like queerness is something that not everyone can come to terms with because of the certain lives that we have, whether that's like external circumstances or like our environment that tells you, you can only be one thing, or like this is how it's always been, or just not being exposed to like certain stories or certain people and realizing this could be like a reality for you. That's how I view even me being queer. Like I've told my girlfriend, I think if I hadn't met you, I probably would have been straight for the rest of my life. Like I wouldn't have realized that about myself. And so when I think about that in relation to the story, there's a chapter in the book called Another Dream. And that's kind of like the most it's more romantic in that sense because you actually see the characters like AAPI together. But it's almost like an alternate reality where maybe if Corinne and Amelia had that time and space to be together and they weren't separated by, oppressive forces or like being 100 years apart or, any other kind of factor, it would be a lot easier to really discover parts of yourself that maybe you weren't able to learn about because of the different ways that trauma from reality has shaped you. And so I think it is a wonderful privilege and blessing to realize that aspect of myself. And I think that to be the same way for the queerness of these characters too. It's not something that they necessarily might have had in the real world, especially for Corinne, who is just focused on trying to survive the whole time. Like she doesn't have the time and space to think about, whether she can like love another person, let alone a woman. And the whole deal with Amelia as well, that gets dived into much more in detail in the story.
Yeah, I definitely did appreciate that little like what if moment. It reminds me of like, when you're watching like anime about like war crimes and grim dark worlds and they have like the spin-off where they're all in high school and happy together. It's like kind of a nice palate cleanser, right? Because in your book, Lauren is literally having the worst day that turns into the worst like century of her life, right? Like she's just looking for her lost sister. She's trying to survive, and she gets thrust into this dream world where essentially because of all these dark thoughts, her subconscious won't let her forget every single mistake she's ever made. And like it's just and I do enjoy is not the is enjoy the right word. I like reading and watching shows. My friends make fun of me because like, oh, like Marvin's watching another like mecha war crimes show again, right? But like there's something about like the catharsis of like someone coming to terms with like themselves and their life that is compelling to watch, but also can get, like you mentioned, very oppressive, right? So like you're writing a story all about just like how trauma just like escalates. Did you have to consciously like figure out how to like drip that trauma into your story without like letting it overwhelm your audience, or was like what was that process like? Was it like did it take like some editing? Did it take some feedback for you to like get that balance right?
I think for me, that's part of why I actually enjoy setting these stories in like a fantasy world, because I really enjoy stories that parallel real human emotions and experiences and feelings, but within the backdrop of fantasy or sci-fi, because I think that's actually what makes it more palatable. It's not a true one-to-one translation of what's going on in the real world, but you're still picking up like the parallels from there. And so I think that's kind of been like my balance, where clearly the characters have a lot of like heavy things to handle and confront with, and there are a lot of like emotional confrontations about that the dream world forces the characters to deal with. But I think part of like the fun experiences for me has been balancing that out with like the rich, lush whimsy of the dream world, but even just describing like the pain or the sorrows of that within the lens of a dream world, and it being very, still whimsical, but like in a very depressing way, if that makes any sense. I don't necessarily know if I have cut back on any of that. I feel like it was very full frontal, that demands a lot of emotional engagement from the readers, but I enjoyed putting it in a fantasy setting. And I think that especially putting it in like a dream world that takes so much of the character's subconscious and reflects that back in the environment, it is kind of like a mirror to what the characters are feeling and experiencing. And I think that's why, like in the example of Corinne, she deals with so much shame and guilt over the things that she's done in her life. And that gets reflected in the dream world in the ways that she's constantly hurt, because it reflects that cycle of self-sabotage and her inability to forgive herself for that. And I think a lot of times, like when you are in the lowest of your depressive episodes, it does feel like drowning in something. And if you don't confront what it is, and you're kind of, distracting it by imagination like Amelia, or anger like Corinne does, instead of like the actual feeling, which is grief and shame, then you're going to be drowned like with it. And you're going to be taken by it like a tide current. And so it was fun for me to have that reflected in like the natural environments in the dream world too.
I really like the way you portrayed the dream world, how it is like this bubble where the characters can, be queer and also confront their fears and confront their shame. And for Amelia, it is a place of like refuge because, she's so scared of reality. She's so scared of like the responsibilities that she has to carry and the future. And, this dream world is a place where she can at least like relax, and as someone who has gone through suicidal ideation, I thought you wrote a really good I think you capture that feeling of like drowning, or I guess like it's not so much that you want to actively kill yourself. It's more like I wouldn't, like, it doesn't matter what happened to me, this indifference of like I would rather just be gone so I don't have to deal with this. And I feel like a lot of people see that trait as, I don't know, it's like as laziness, but I'm like, it's not. You're carrying so much weight. And I love how you portray that with your characters. They're carrying so much shame, so much anger, so much grief. And it's like, okay, well, this dreamscape allows them to heal. And I was wondering like how your healing journey has changed as you were writing this book, as you were drafting each draft.
I have been through so many different therapy sessions and depressive episodes and so many mental breakdowns, like from my own personal life while writing this book and even going through the publishing process too. I feel like at any point in my life, I'm always going through something mentally. And so it's been like a work in progress for me to continue to try to stay afloat. And I think like so much of what I had learned through my therapy sessions and my own mental health journey had influenced a lot of like the character arcs too. Like when my editor and I were talking about the themes of escapism, we were working on developmental edits at this point. And we were talking about the themes of escapism and how the character of Amelia, the escapism is very obvious for her because she literally is escaping into a dream world to avoid reality. But with Corinne, her escapism is less obvious because in a way she uses her anger to avoid reality, which is like her actual feelings of grief and shame, because it's so much easier to be overly cynical about life than to admit to like the vulnerability of hoping for a better future or avoiding the disappointment of hoping for a better future and not getting it. And I think in a way that was very relatable to the ways that I've kind of navigated through life too. Like I consider myself to be a very cynical person, but like Corinne, I think it is very much a coping mechanism because we're so afraid of the disappointment and the hurt feelings of like daring to hope for something. And I think that, there's some things that I've also come to terms with about the ways that I have handled my depression and my different coping mechanisms, healthy or unhealthy, that I have tried to infuse with the characters as well. And so I definitely think that the story grew along with me. Like both the characters and I were going through it and we kind of like we're clawing our way out now into like finally debut release. But it's like an ongoing work in progress for sure. And I think that was something that I wanted to reflect with, like even in the ending as well. Like I didn't want it to be totally depressing, but I also didn't want it to be totally happy either. I just wanted to feel like this is how life is. And I think because we acknowledge the darkness of how, humanity will inevitably always deal with grief and tragedy, but by acknowledging it, we can move forward with figuring out what is going to be the thing that keeps us going. And for me, I found that it has been so valuable to turn to each other for that. And that's how I've been able to like grapple with it and still, navigate through this messy world. And I try to infuse that within the story as well.
Yeah, I mean, the fact that you have to go draft after draft of these characters going through so much pain and also frankly crashing out. It's like it's like, okay, how do we move forward? Let's go on this healing journey together. And I am curious because you did say in one of your videos that you are going to come up with a roasting video for your book, and I'm so curious as to like what like, can you give us a slight preview on like what you would say about Corin as like this very unlikable character who's very self-destructive and crashes out quite often?
Yeah, she's definitely like, for me, my nickname for her is like Crash Out Corinne, because she literally is always like in a crisis somehow, and she's just like dedicated to being like the most miserable bitch in the world. But like in a way, it's so much of it is like the worst parts of my depression as well, where I'm just like giving in to being like miserable. And she was like an outlet for me in that sense. But in terms of like the roast video, I feel like because I've been stuck with these characters for so long and the story for so long, I have a lot of jokes and jabs that I want to make about like each of the characters. I think Corinne is definitely an easy one because she is just so angsty and insufferable in a way that I find to be relatable, because it borrows so much from, you know, what I tend to do as well. I want to sit down and like properly like script it out. But I definitely, you know, want to poke fun at like Corinne crashing out every other chapter. She's basically like a punching bag. And, you know, Amelia basically like sleeping the entire time and like not doing anything.
And like Malicene being like, I have sister issues. I have vengeance on my mind because I was not included. There's a lot more baggage when it comes to Malicene, but
like, and basically like Malicene is the character that is trying to keep the other characters off the ledge. Like they're just trying to make sure that the other characters don't like kill themselves, and that's the reason why they're the MVP in the whole book, because they're constantly trying to pull the other one out and be like, okay, stop trying to kill yourself. You're gonna ruin my floors. You're gonna mess up this whole dream world I've created. You know, you're doing too much.
Yeah. In my mind, she was rolling her eyes every other chapter, or every single chapter, actually.
I was just thinking, it's just like, oh, like it's like we have intruders in our house, and it's like, oh my god, like take off your shoes, you're ruining everything. And like that was kind of like the vibe I was getting from Malicene, and I just like had to chuckle at some of her, you know, be like, that's mahogany, like very like moments where moments when they were like, okay, maybe don't destroy all the things that I worked really hard to make. So, you know, you've been a long time reviewer, and obviously you have to be like, you have to be able to articulate why you don't like a book and like kind of dissect the story and the themes. And I'm wondering if having that ability has shaped your way in approaching storytelling and also like mapping out your own narrative of this book.
Yeah, definitely. And I think they kind of feed into each other as well. I think that because I've read so many books, I think I said this before, where I don't think reading makes you a better writer necessarily, but it makes you a more purposeful one. And so it can only go up from here. And I think with each book that I read, even if I don't like a book, it still gives me some more knowledge about what I would like to have in my own story. And then on the flip side of things, I find that now being a writer, and now I'm still continuing to read books, it makes me both critical, like more critical than I was before, because I've been through like the editing process, and now I've been like much more of a scrutinizer. But at the same time, I feel like I've become more empathetic with other authors, because now I kind of know what the other side is like and how difficult it can be sometimes to really put yourself out there. And I think also it frames in my mind how if I don't like a book, it's not necessarily because the book is bad. It's just that it wasn't for me, because that's how I see my book as well, where I know it's not going to be the kind of story that is to everyone's taste, but it's a very like hyper specific thing that I enjoy, and it will find like its own audience from there. And I think that has made me more understanding when I read other books that don't necessarily hit for me, but I can think, oh, okay, this would be really good for like, you know, this type of reader or someone who's looking for this type of story. But definitely like going back to how reading and reviewing books has influenced my writing. In a way, it kind of helps that I am so critical and scrutinize a lot of writing, because I think I'm the same way with like my own writing too. And so I totally don't mind like when I receive like edit notes from you know, the different editors or my agent, I'm totally fine with like killing a bunch of things or rewriting like another thing entirely in order to make it stronger. I think I'm already used to like that default set of being very critical. And so I'm like more than willing to tackle that on too as a writer.
Yeah, no double standards for you. You're just like the scrutiny I give to other authors, I put on myself. And
yes, exactly.
That's great.
If not, like probably even more tenfold to myself too.
But like now that you're an author, like what is your stance on like authors being active in reader spaces? Because I'm sure you've like heard stories about authors being tagged in reviews online, and it's not necessarily a great thing. And then there are also authors who have like lurked in reader spaces and have harassed readers. Like I'm just curious as to like what your take on authors being in reader spaces are now, because now you're an author.
Yeah, I think because I've had that experience of being a reader and a reader that, you know, will post their opinions and reviews, I understand the annoyance with an author lurking and like taking things very personally, because for me as a reader, it's nothing personal to the author at all. And I think that it does a disservice to them for them to be lurking and collecting like chips on their shoulders and taking it personally when like it doesn't have to be that way. And so I've kind of brought that sentiment for me as well as an author, where I have downloaded an extension that actually removes ratings and reviews so that I don't have to look at that, just because I don't think it's my business. And like I said, I don't think it does a service to both the reader and myself. And I also don't think it's healthy for any person to constantly consume what other people think about their book or themselves. And I've learned that from being a content creator as well. Like I feel like I've had to be very careful with making sure that my sense of self-worth is not dependent on external circumstances or like people. And I feel like that helped me grow a thick skin just from being like a person on the internet and also a woman of color on the internet. And I've tried to bring that over to this next level of being an author. So yeah, I personally don't read reviews because, again, it's not my business. But if I do get tagged in a review, I will read it, just because I see that as like, if the person has tagged me, that's probably like an invite for me to like read it or engage with them. And that's something that I'm more than happy to do, because, you know, if I'm already blocking myself off from like reading what other people are saying. So it's actually nice when people tag me, because now I'm like, okay, yay, I get permission to do so. And it's also nice because like, I've had the story in my mind for so long that now that other people are like reading it and reacting to it, it's kind of fun almost feeling like I'm now in that fandom with them, but I'm just like the person that happened to have created it. But like we can both react or poke fun at the characters together. And so then I can kind of enjoy it both as like an author and reader too.
Yeah, I can't wait to see people make videos like criticizing your book and also like reviewing it, because I'm so curious as to like seeing like what other people's opinions are. Yeah, because I mean, like as an author, it's probably like, nope, I don't want to see that. But like would you watch like video reviews if people like posted them, or is that something that is like, okay, like I'm going to use my extension and just not look at it?
Yeah. So I pretty much have my extension on default. I would only watch videos if they had tagged me in them, because then I feel like that's permission to, you know, check it out and see what they say. But I don't think that it's healthy to like search up my name or, you know, search around like what other people are saying. Because again, I don't think that humans should be cognizant of everything people are saying about them. So I would personally opt out of that, especially because I'm one of those people that make videos about other books, and I would definitely not want authors to watch those videos and get their feelings hurt. So I am going to practice what I preach and stay out of their lane.
I think that's a pretty healthy mindset. So we're towards like the end of our interview, and I would be remiss to not mention how gorgeous your cover is for your debut novel. And as a designer yourself, you probably had a specific vision for your debut novel's cover. Like, did it meet your expectations? Like, what was your vision? Like, what did you give notes to the designer saying, like, these are the things that absolutely have to be on the cover?
Yeah. I was super lucky with being involved with the cover process, where my publisher gave me a lot of free rein to be very specific with what I wanted the cover to look like. It started with like a very badly drawn Post-it sketch that I had, and I put together like a deck that had all of these details about the certain characters and places to depict, and it had like a mood board for each one so that the artist would know what exactly to draw. And I also got to pick the artist as well, and even like suggest, like, they asked me for a list of artists, and I was very lucky to have ended up with the artist that was like at the top of my list. And also, she's Filipina, and pretty much like everyone on the US team are all either South or Southeast Asian women. So that's been really cool to see that all come together. But I was involved for like every process, from the sketches to the coloring to like the final product. And it was really fun for me to experience that as a designer, because, you know, I've designed for like websites and branding campaigns, but I've not done anything like related to a book cover at all. And this was like my own book. So it was really, really cool to see that evolve throughout the whole process. And I tried my best to like, you know, I was kind of worried like with giving very prescriptive feedback, because I didn't want people to think I was being like a diva or anything like that, or regret giving me so much ammunition to just ask, you know, what specifically I wanted. But I'm so happy with how the cover turned out. It was definitely the vision that I had wanted, if not even better than the original vision.
Yeah, it's an artwork. I would definitely hang it in my living room because the cover just looks gorgeous.
Yeah. Well, congratulations on your debut. We're recording this in the back half of May, but by the time you're listening to this, dear listeners, Cindy's book will have been out for about a week. So this is usually when we ask what else you're working on, but we already covered that earlier. But is there anything you want to plug about, you know, the launch of your book, or any events or anything happening in June?
Oh, yeah. So basically, any events that are happening, you can find at readwithcindy.com. I'll be doing a book tour during the release week, but then I'll also be popping in for different book festivals that are going on throughout the summer. And you can find me anywhere at Read with Cindy on social media. I've kept it pretty simple with that one name the whole time. But yeah, if anyone checks out the book, just remember that it does deal with a lot of themes of depression and suicidal ideation. So if that's a, you know, sensitive subject for you, just make sure to take care of yourself first and foremost.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for joining us on Books and Boba, Cindy, and congratulations on your debut.
Yeah, congratulations.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
And that was Cindy Pham. Her debut novel, The Secret World of Briar Rose, is available now at booksellers everywhere, including, as always, the Books and Boba online bookstore. So if you enjoyed our conversation with Cindy and want to pick up her book, you can do so while also supporting Books and Boba and your local bookstores by going to booksandboba.com and clicking on our bookshop link. And yeah, Rira, before we go, can you remind our readers what book we are reading this month for book club?
Yeah, so this month is my pick, and I chose The Chosen and the Beautiful by Nhi Vo, and it is a magical queer retelling of The Great Gatsby, and it follows a Vietnamese immigrant socialite in the 1920s. Yeah, so we've read Nhi Vo's previous works before. We've read The Empress of Salt and Fortune as a previous book club pick. That was a novella, and this is a full-length novel, so I'm really curious to see like how I guess the writing holds up because they're two different forms of narrative storytelling. So excited to talk to you guys about it on Discord and also in our future episode.
Yeah, and that will do it for this episode of Books and Boba. Thank you once again to Cindy Pham for joining us, and we'll see you all next time. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to Books and Boba. This podcast was hosted by Marvin Yue and Rira Yu and edited and produced by Marvin Yue. Follow the book club on Twitter and Instagram by going to @BooksandBoba and engage with us on Goodreads on our Goodreads group. You can also check out past episodes of the podcast by going to booksandboba.com and by subscribing to us on your favorite podcast app. Don't forget, you can support Books and Boba and Asian American authors by purchasing books at our bookshop.org account. Check out the link in our show notes and also at booksandboba.com. Books and Boba is a proud member of the Potluck Podcast Collective, a collective of Asian American hosted podcasts featuring unique voices and stories from the Asian diaspora. Learn more about the collective and check out our fellow Potluck shows by visiting the website podcastpotluck.com. Thanks for listening.
Co-host the podcast Asians in Baseball alongside Naomi Ko and Scott Okamoto. Asians in Baseball is exactly what it sounds like, a podcast about the Asian and Asian Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander Americans in Major League Baseball. Every week, we break down the highlights of what's going on with Asians in baseball and then take a deeper dive into the Asian and Asian Americans past and present who have shaped baseball as it is today. Whether you're Kim Eng's #1 fan or you've never even heard of Hideo Nomo, we've got something for everyone, especially for the Shohei Ohtani stans. Maybe too much for the Shohei Ohtani stans. Listen to Asians in Baseball wherever you get podcasts, part of the Potluck Podcast Collective.
Hey, I'm Phil Yu, and you may know me from a blog called Angry Asian Man.
And I'm Jeff Yang, author, journalist, and celebrity dad.
We host a podcast called They Call Us Bruce, an unfiltered conversation about what's happening in Asian America.
Each week or so, we host a discussion about some of the most vital and interesting topics in our pop culture and our community, bringing in guests who are shaping and informing this thing called Asian America from Hollywood to DC and beyond.
We got media, entertainment, food, family, politics, representation.
The good, the bad, the WTF of it all.
So check us out wherever you get your podcasts or at theycallusbruce.com.
Peace.
Peace.